All right, everybody. Without further ado, we are right back at it for another night of Dad Reads a Bedtime Story. So, for those of you that are just joining, we are still on R.L. Stine's Goosebumps series. This one is My Hairiest Adventure. Let's go. Chapter 8. Did you sleep? Mom asked as I dragged myself into the kitchen for breakfast. You look pale. Dad lowered his newspaper to check me out. A white mug of coffee steamed in front of him. He doesn't look pale to me, he muttered before returning to his newspaper. I slept okay, I said, sliding on the stool that at the breakfast counter. I studied my hand, keeping it under the counter just in case. No hair. It looked perfectly smooth. I had jumped out of bed the instant Mom called from downstairs. I turned on the light and studied my entire body in front of my dresser mirror. No black hair. I was so happy I felt like singing. I felt like hugging Mom and Dad and doing a dance on the breakfast table. But that would be embarrassing. So I happily ate my frosted flakes and drank my orange juice. Mom sat down beside Dad and started to crack open a hard-boiled egg. She had a hard-boiled egg every morning, but she threw away the yellow and only ate the white. She said she didn't want the cholesterol. Mom and Dad, I have to tell you something. I did a pretty stupid thing yesterday. I found an old bottle of cream called Instatan in a trash dumpster, and my friends and I rubbed it all on ourselves, so we'd have tans. But the date had run out on the bottle, and, well, last night I suddenly grew some really gross black hair on the back of my hand. That's what I wanted to say. I wanted to tell them about it. I even opened my mouth to start telling them, but I couldn't do it. I'd be so embarrassed. They would just start yelling at me and think what a jerk I was. They'd probably drag me after Mr. Merkin and tell him what I'd done. And then he would tell me how stupid I'd been. So I kept my mouth shut. You're awfully quiet this morning, Mom said, sliding a sliver of egg white into her mouth. Nothing much to talk about, I muttered. I ran into Lily on the way to school. She had her coat collar pulled up and a red and blue wool ski cap pulled down over her short blonde hair. It isn't that cold, I said, jogging to catch up with her. Mom said it's going to be down to 10, Lily replied. She made me bundle up. The morning sun floated low over the houses, a red ball in the pale sky. The wind fell sharp. We leaned into it as we walked. A hard crust had formed over the snow, and our boots crunched loudly. I took a deep breath. I decided to ask Lily the big question in my mind. Lily, I started hesitantly, did any strange hair grow on the back of your hands last night? She stopped walking and stared at me. A solemn expression darkened on her face. Yes, she confessed in a hushed whisper. Chapter 9. Huh? I gasped. My heart skipped a beat. You grew hair on your hand? Lily nodded grimly. She moved closer. Her blue eye and her green eye stared at me from under the wool ski cap. Hair grew on my hands, she whispered, her breath steaming up in the cold air as she talked. Then it grew on my arms and my legs and my back. I let out a choked cry. Then my face changed into a werewolf's face, Lily continued, still staring hard at me, and I ran out into the woods and howled at the moon, like this. She threw back her head and uttered a long, mournful howl. Then I found 3 people in the woods, and I ate them, Lily declared, because I'm a werewolf. She growled at me and snapped her teeth, and then she burst out laughing. I could feel my face turning red. Lily gave me a hard, playful shove. I lost my balance and nearly fell onto my back. She laughed even harder. You believed me, didn't you, Larry? She accused. You actually believed that dumb story. No way, I cried. My face felt red hot. No way, Lily. Of course I didn't believe you. But I had believed her story, up to the part where she said she ate 3 people. Then that's when I finally figured out that she was joking, and she was just teasing me. Harry Larry, Lily chanted. Harry Larry. Stop it, I insisted angrily. You're not funny, You're not funny at all. Well, you are, she shot back, funny looking. Ha ha, I replied sarcastically. I turned and crossed the street, taking long strides, trying to get away from her. Harry Larry, she called, chasing after me. Harry Larry. I slid on a patch of ice. I quickly caught my balance, but my backpack slid off my shoulder and dropped with a thud onto the street. As I bent to pick it up, Lily stood over me. Did you grow hair last night, Larry? She demanded. Huh? I pretended not to hear her. Did you grow hair on the back of your hand? Is that why you asked me? Lily said, leaning over me. No, no way, I muttered. I hoisted the backpack onto my shoulder and started walking again. No way, I repeated. Lily laughed. Are you a werewolf? I pretended to laugh too. No, I'm a vampire, I replied. I wish I could tell Lily the truth. I really wanted to tell her about the patch of ugly hair, but I knew she could never keep a secret. I knew she would spread the whole story over the whole school, and then everyone I knew would call me Harry Larry for the rest of my life. I felt bad about lying to her. I mean, she is my best friend, but what could I do? We walked the rest of the way to school without saying much. I kept glancing over at Lily. She had the strangest smile on her face. Are you ready to present your book reports? Miss Shinling asked. The classroom erupted with sounds, chairs scraping, trapper keepers being opened, papers being rustled, throats being cleared. Standing in front of the entire class and reciting a book report makes everyone nervous. It makes me very nervous. I just hate having everyone stare at me. And if I goof up a word or forget what I want to say next, I always turn bright red, and then everyone laughs and makes fun of me. The night before, I had practiced my book report standing in front of the mirror, and I had done pretty well, only a few tiny mistakes. Of course, I hadn't been nervous giving the report to myself in the room. Now my knees were shaking, and I hadn't even been called on yet. Howie, would you give your report first? Miss Shinling asked, motioning for Howie Herman to come to the front of the class. It's a shame to have the best go first, Howie replied, grinning. A few kids laughed. Other kids groaned. I knew that Howie wasn't joking. He really thought that he was the best at everything. He stepped confidently to the front of the room. Howie is a big guy, sort of chubby, with thick brown hair that he never brushes, and a big round face with freckles on his cheeks. He always has a smirk on his face, a stuck-up look that says, I'm the best and you're an insect. He usually wears baggy faded denim jeans, about 5 sizes too big, and a long t-shirt with a shiny black vest opened over it. He held up the book he was reporting on, one of the Matt Christopher baseball books. I groaned to myself. I knew in advance exactly what Howie was going to say. I recommend this book to anyone who likes baseball. That's how Howie always started his book reports. So boring. But Howie always got A's anyway. I never understood why Miss Shinling thinks he's so terrific. Howie cleared his throat and grinned at Miss Shinling. Then he turned to the class and started his report in a loud, steady voice. I recommend this book to anyone who likes baseball, he began. Told you. I yawned loudly. No one seemed to notice. Howie droned on. This is a very exciting book with a very good plot, he said. If you like a lot of excitement, you'll like this book, especially if you're a baseball fan. I didn't hear the rest of it. I kept silently going over and over my own book report. A few minutes later, when Miss Shinling announced, Larry, you're next, I almost didn't hear her. I took a deep breath and climbed to my feet. Stay cool, Larry, I told myself. You've practiced your report. There's nothing to be nervous about. Clearing my throat loudly, I started up the aisle to the front of the room. I was halfway up the aisle when Howie stuck out his foot. I saw his big grin, but I did not see his foot. Oh, I cried out in surprise as I stumbled over it and went sprawling onto the floor. The classroom exploded with laughter. My heart pounding, I started to pull myself up, but I stopped when I saw my hands. Both of them were bristling with thick black hair. Chapter 10. Larry, are you okay? I heard Miss Shinling call from her desk. I was too stunned to answer. Larry, are you hurt? Well, I couldn't speak at all. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. Crouched on the floor, I stared in horror at my hairy hands. Above me, I could hear kids still laughing about how Howie had tripped me. I glanced up to see the kid next to Howie slapping him a high five. Ha ha, very funny. Usually I'd be totally embarrassed, but I didn't have the time to be embarrassed. I was too scared. Had anyone seen my hairy hands? Still down on the floor, I glanced quickly around the room. No one was pointing in horror or crying out. Maybe no one had caught a glimpse of them yet. Quickly, I jammed both hands deep into my jean pockets. When I was sure that both hands were completely hidden, I climbed slowly to my feet. Look, Larry is blushing, someone called from the back row. The room exploded with more laughter. Of course, that made me blush even redder, but blushing wasn't exactly my biggest problem. There was no way I could stand in front of the class with these two hairy hands. I'd rather die. Without even thinking about it, I started hurrying back up the aisle to the classroom door. With my hands jammed into my jeans, it wasn't easy to walk fast. Larry, what's wrong? Miss Shinling called out from the front of the room. Where are you going? I'll be right back, I managed to choke out. Are you sure you're okay? The teacher asked. Yeah, fine, I mumbled. Be right back, really. I knew everyone was staring at me, but I just didn't care. I just had to get out of there. I had to figure out what to do about my hands. As I reached the door, I heard Miss Shinling scold Howie. You could have hurt Larry. You shouldn't trip people, Howie. I've warned you before. But Miss Shinling, it was an accident, Howie lied. I slipped out the door, into the long, empty hall. I checked to make sure no one was around to see me. Then I pulled my hands from my pockets. I had a dim hope that maybe my hands would be back to normal, but that hope vanished as soon as I raised them to the light. Thick, black hair, nearly an inch, covered both hands. How could it grow so fast? I wondered. The back of my hands were hairy, and my palms were hairy too. Hair poked up from the knuckles of my fingers, and clumps of black hair grew in the space between my fingers. I rubbed my hands together, as if trying to rub the ugly hair away, but of course it didn't want to come off. No, please, no, I moaned out loud without realizing it. What could I do? I couldn't go back to class with these hairy monster hands. They would make everyone sick. I would be embarrassed for the rest of my life. Whenever anyone would see me coming, they'd say, Here comes Hairy Larry Boyd. Remember the day the black hair grew all over his hands? I'll run home, I decided. I'll get away from here. No. How could I leave school in the middle of the morning? Miss Shinling was waiting for me to return and give my book report. I stood frozen, my back against the tile wall, gazing at the hideous hands. And I suddenly realized that I wasn't alone in the hallway. I glanced up and gasped when I saw Mr. Fosberg, the principal. He was carrying a stack of textbooks, but he had stopped a few feet away from me, and he was staring in shock at my hairy hands. All right. Good job. So we are up to chapter 11. We'll go ahead and call it one for the day. Readers and everybody, thank you guys for joining us. Shout out to the Knights, any Knights of Pythagoras we got joining us for today, any parents. You guys have a good one, and we will see you tomorrow night. Thanks.